Silk and lace scattered across my bedroom floor, like fallen snow, each torn piece of my wedding dress, telling the story of a woman who thought she could destroy my future to secure her own daughter's happiness. When I walked into my room that Tuesday morning, 3 days before my wedding, I found Cathy Thorne standing over the remains of my $4,000 custom gown with a pair of fabric scissors still in her hand, my stepsister Lovely Shaw trying on my veil in the mirror behind her. "She deserves it more than you," Cathy said, without even flinching, gesturing toward Lovely like she was explaining why she'd given away my leftovers. "Besides, Julian Finch should be marrying someone from a real family, not some orphan playing dress-up." What they didn't know was that destroying my dress wouldn't just ruin my wedding day, it would teach me exactly how ruthless I needed to become to protect everything I'd built. And by the time I was done, they'd learn that underestimating an orphan was the biggest mistake of their privileged little lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Tuesday in Willowbrook Heights, with the autumn sun streaming through the bay windows of the house I'd called home for the past 8 years. I'd woken up early, buzzing with the kind of nervous excitement that comes 3 days before your wedding. My dress had arrived from the boutique in Meridian City the week before, and I was planning to have one final fitting with my maid of honor, Cathy Finch, Julian's sister, who'd become more of a real family to me than the people I actually lived with. I padded down the hallway toward my bedroom, coffee mug in hand, thinking about the last-minute details I needed to handle. The flowers from Thornfield Gardens were confirmed, the venue at Rosewood Manor was ready, and Julian had texted me that morning, saying he couldn't wait to see me walk down the aisle. After losing my parents in a car accident when I was 17, I never thought I'd have a family again. But Julian and his family had embraced me completely, and in 3 days I'd officially become Coraline Finch. That's when I heard voices coming from my room. My stepmother Cathy's voice, sharp and authoritative as always, and another voice I recognized as my stepsister Lovely. The door was slightly ajar, and what I saw through the crack made my blood turn to ice. Lovely Shaw stood in front of my full-length mirror, wearing my wedding veil, turning side to side as if she were modeling it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was my wedding dress, my beautiful custom-made ivory silk dress with hand-sewn lace appliques, lying in pieces across my bedroom floor, actual pieces. The bodice had been cut clean through, the skirt was in tatters, and the delicate sleeves that had taken the seamstress weeks to perfect were destroyed beyond repair. Cathy Thorne stood over the carnage with a pair of fabric scissors in her hand, examining her handiwork like she'd just finished pruning her prized rose bushes. "Perfect," Cathy said, her voice cold and satisfied. "This should fit you beautifully once we take it to the seamstress. The ivory will complement your complexion much better than it ever would hers." I must have made a sound, a gasp, a whimper, something, because they both turned toward the door. Lovely's face went pale under the veil, but Cathy didn't even have the decency to look surprised. She looked almost pleased to see me standing there. "Oh good, you're awake," she said, setting the scissors down on my dresser like she'd just finished gift wrapping a present. "We need to discuss some changes to the wedding arrangements." I pushed the door open fully, and stepped into what used to be my sanctuary. The room felt different now, violated. My wedding dress, the dress I'd saved for months to afford, the dress that had made me feel like a princess when I first tried it on, was nothing but expensive scraps scattered across my hardwood floor. "What did you do?" The words came out as barely a whisper. Cathy straightened her shoulders, that familiar look of righteous indignation settling across her features. "I did what needed to be done. Lovely's engagement to Cedric Vance was announced last night, and their wedding has been moved up to this Saturday. The same Saturday as yours, actually." I stared at her, my brain struggling to process what she was saying. "Moved up, why?" "The Vance family has some business obligations that require the wedding to happen sooner," she said smoothly. "And since Lovely is my biological daughter, and since the Vances are one of the most prominent families in the state, it only makes sense that she should have the better dress, the better venue, the better everything." My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor, hot liquid splashing across my bare feet. I didn't even feel it. "You can't be serious," I said, looking back and forth between them. "That's my dress. My wedding is in 3 days. The invitations have been sent, the venue is booked." "Was booked," Cathy interrupted. "I called Rosewood Manor this morning, and transferred the reservation to Lovely's name. The Vances specifically requested that venue, and frankly, it's more appropriate for their social circle anyway." Lovely finally pulled the veil off her head, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, maybe we should what?" Cathy snapped. Should let this little charity case have the wedding she thinks she deserves. Coraline, you need to understand something. You are not my daughter. You were a burden that your father left me with when he died, and I've tolerated your presence in this house out of the goodness of my heart. But I will not stand by and watch you embarrass our family name by marrying into the Finch family with some elaborate charade. The words hit me like physical blows. I'd always known Cathy didn't love me the way she loved Lovely, but I'd never heard her say it so bluntly, so cruelly. Julian loves me, I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by anger. His family loves me, they chose me. Cathy laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Oh darling, Julian loves the idea of you. The orphan girl with the tragic story who makes him feel like a hero. But when reality sets in, when he realizes what kind of family he'd actually be marrying into, or should I say, what kind of family he wouldn't be marrying into, he'll see the truth. You're damaged goods, Coraline. No amount of white silk and flowers can change that. I looked down at the remains of my dress, at months of my savings torn to shreds on my bedroom floor. Then I looked at Lovely, who was fidgeting with the engagement ring on her finger, a ring I'd never seen before. How long? I asked quietly. How long? What? Cathy replied. How long have you been planning this? The engagement to Cedric, moving up the wedding date, stealing my venue, destroying my dress. How long? Cathy's smile was sharp as a blade. Does it matter? What matters is that Lovely will marry into the Vance family this weekend, and you'll finally understand your place in this world, which is nowhere. I bent down and picked up a piece of my dress, part of the bodice where the seamstress had hand-stitched tiny pearls in a delicate pattern. It had been my favorite detail, something that made the dress uniquely mine. Now it was just another casualty in Cathy's war against my happiness. She deserves it more than you, Cathy said, gesturing toward Lovely, like she was explaining why she'd given away my leftovers. Besides, Julian Finch should be marrying someone from a real family, not some orphan playing dress-up. Something inside me snapped, not broke, snapped, like a rubber band that had been stretched too far, and finally found its breaking point. I stood up slowly, still holding the piece of ruined silk, and looked directly into Cathy's eyes. You're right, I said calmly. Lovely does deserve a beautiful wedding, and you're right that I'm not your real daughter, but you've made one crucial mistake. Cathy raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what's that? You assumed that because I'm an orphan, I'm helpless. You assumed that because I've been quiet and grateful all these years, I'm weak. I let the piece of fabric flutter to the floor. You assumed that destroying my dress would destroy me. I walked past them both toward my closet, stepping carefully around the debris of my destroyed wedding dress. From the back corner, I pulled out an overnight bag, and started filling it with essentials. What are you doing? Lovely asked, speaking for the first time since I'd entered the room. Leaving, I said simply. You want the house, the venue, the dress, take it all, but don't mistake my leaving for surrender, Cathy. Mistake it for strategy. I closed the bag and slung it over my shoulder. At the doorway, I turned back one last time. Cathy was standing in exactly the same spot, scissors still in her hand, but her expression had shifted slightly. For the first time that morning, she looked uncertain. By the way, I said, my voice perfectly steady, you might want to call Julian and explain why his fiancée disappeared 3 days before their wedding. I'm sure he'll be very interested to hear how his future mother-in-law decided to handle family business. And with that, I walked out of the room, down the stairs, and out of the house that had never really been my home. I didn't slam the door, I didn't scream or cry, or beg. I just left, the same way I'd learned to survive everything else life had thrown at me, quietly, with dignity, and with a plan already forming in my mind. Because Cathy was wrong about one thing. Being an orphan hadn't made me weak, it had made me resourceful, and she was about to find out exactly what that meant. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive to Genevieve's apartment in downtown Willowbrook took exactly 23 minutes, but it felt like hours. I kept my hands steady on the steering wheel, my breathing controlled, my eyes focused on the road ahead. The breakdown could come later. Right now, I needed to think. Genevieve Finch lived in a converted warehouse in the Arts District, the kind of place with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that screamed creativity and independence. As Julian's older sister and a successful photographer, she'd never needed anyone's approval or validation. I'd always admired that about her, and now I needed to channel some of that fierce self-reliance. I called her from the parking lot. Cora, what's wrong? Her voice was immediately alert. Genevieve had always been able to read me better than most people. Can I come up? I need to talk to you about something important. Of course, I'm in the studio on the third floor. The elevator ride gave me just enough time to rehearse what I was going to say. I needed to be calm, factual, strategic. Genevieve was going to be furious when she heard what her future sister-in-law had done, and I needed her anger to work for me, not against me. She opened the door before I could knock, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing the paint-splattered overalls. That meant she'd been working on a new project. One look at my face, and her expression shifted from concern to alarm. What happened? I told her everything. The destroyed dress, Cathy's cruel words, Lovely's secret engagement, the stolen venue. I kept my voice level throughout the entire story, reporting the facts like a journalist, instead of a victim. Genevieve listened without interrupting, her jaw growing tighter with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she walked to her kitchen, and came back with 2 glasses of wine, even though it was barely 10 in the morning. Okay, she said, settling into the chair across from me. First things first. Are you okay? I mean really okay? I took a sip of wine, and considered the question honestly. I'm hurt, I'm angry. But I'm not broken, if that's what you're asking. Good. Because what I'm about to say might sound harsh, but I think you need to hear it. She leaned forward, her expression serious. Cathy Thorne just did you the biggest favor of your life. I stared at her. How do you figure that? Think about it, Cora. You were about to marry into our family, while still living under the roof of someone who sees you as a charity case. Someone who was willing to destroy your happiness to elevate her own daughter. Did you really want to spend the rest of your life dealing with that woman as your stepmother-in-law? I wouldn't have had to deal with her much after the wedding. Are you kidding? Genevieve interrupted. She would have been at every holiday, every family gathering, every important moment of your marriage. She would have found ways to undermine you, to make you feel small, to remind you that you're not real family. Now she's shown you exactly who she is, and you can deal with her accordingly. I hadn't thought about it that way. In my mind, marriage to Julian meant escape from Cathy's house, the start of a new life, where her opinion wouldn't matter. But Genevieve was right. Family ties aren't severed by wedding ceremonies, especially when those ties are poisonous. So what do you think I should do? Genevieve smiled, and it was the kind of smile that had once gotten her expelled from boarding school for orchestrating an elaborate prank on the headmistress. I think you should let them have their weekend. Let Lovely wear whatever makeshift dress they can cobble together from your destroyed one. Let them have your venue, your flowers, your photographer. I don't understand. Cora, you're thinking about this all wrong. You're thinking like someone who just lost something. But you didn't lose anything. You gained information. Valuable, actionable information about what kind of people you're dealing with. She stood up, and walked to her desk, pulling out a notebook and pen. Julian doesn't know about any of this yet, right? No, I came straight here. Perfect. Here's what we're going to do. First, you're going to call Julian, and tell him you need to postpone the wedding. Not cancel, postpone. Tell him you need time to handle some family business. But trust me. Second, you're going to stay here with me for the next few weeks. My couch is comfortable, and I could use the company. Third, we're going to let Cathy and Lovely have their moment of triumph. Let them think they've won. I was starting to see where this was going. And then, my dear future sister-in-law, we're going to plan you a wedding that makes whatever they're throwing together this weekend look like a backyard barbecue. Her eyes glittered with mischief, and something darker. But more importantly, we're going to make sure that Cathy Thorne learns exactly what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. I don't want revenge, General. I just want to marry your brother and move on with my life. Who said anything about revenge? She asked innocently. I'm talking about justice. I'm talking about making sure that woman never has the power to hurt you or anyone else again. And I'm talking about showing her that destroying your dress wasn't the end of your story. It was just the beginning of hers. I felt something shift inside me, a gear clicking into place. Genevieve was right. I had been thinking like a victim, like someone who had lost something precious. But what I'd actually lost was the illusion that Cathy Thorne would ever see me as family, would ever treat me with basic human decency. And losing an illusion, even a comforting one, was ultimately liberating. What did you have in mind? Oh, I have so many ideas, Genevieve said, her smile growing wider. But first, let's take care of the immediate crisis. Call Julian. Tell him you need a few weeks to handle some personal matters, and that you'll explain everything when the time is right. He trusts you, so he won't push for details. And the wedding, we'll plan something better, something that reflects who you really are, not who Cathy thinks you should be. Something intimate and meaningful, and absolutely gorgeous. She paused. But we're going to wait until after we deal with your step-family situation. Deal with it how? Genevieve's expression grew serious. Cora, in my experience, people like Cathy Thorne don't stop at one cruel act, they escalate. She destroyed your dress and stole your venue because she thought she could get away with it. If you just walk away and let it go, she'll see that as permission to do something worse to the next person who crosses her path. What if I don't care about the next person? What if I just want to protect myself? Then you're thinking too small. Genevieve stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. You know what your real strength is, Cora. It's not that you're nice or grateful or accommodating. It's that you're a survivor. You lost your parents, lived with a step family that treats you like hired help, and still managed to build a life for yourself. You put yourself through college, got a good job, saved enough money to pay for your own wedding. You did all of that without any real support system. She turned back to me. Now imagine what you could accomplish if you stopped playing defense and started playing offense. I thought about the scene in my bedroom that morning, Cathy standing over the ruins of my dress with scissors in her hand, that satisfied smile on her face. Lovely avoiding eye contact, because she knew what they were doing was wrong, but didn't have the backbone to stop it. The casual cruelty of it all, the assumption that I would just accept whatever they decided to do to me. You're right, I said quietly. She won't stop here. And even if she did, she's already done enough. So, I finished my wine and set the glass down carefully. So let's see how she likes being on the receiving end for once. Genevieve clapped her hands together. That's my future sister-in-law. Now let's start making some phone calls. We have a wedding to postpone and a plan to develop. As I pulled out my phone to call Julian, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The anticipation of taking control, instead of just responding to whatever life threw at me. Cathy had meant to humiliate me, to put me in my place, to show me how powerless I really was. Instead, she'd just awakened something in me that I'd been keeping carefully contained since my parents died. The part of me that had learned to fight for everything I wanted, that had survived when survival seemed impossible. She thought destroying my dress would end my story. She had no idea it was just the first chapter. 6 weeks later, I was standing in the conference room at Highland Marketing Solutions, presenting a campaign strategy to our biggest client, when my phone started buzzing with the kind of persistence that meant someone was either very excited or very desperate. The client meeting ran long, as they always did when the proposal was good enough to generate real discussion. So by the time I finally checked my messages, I had 12 missed calls and 17 text messages, all from the same contact, Cathy Thorne. The first text was time-stamped from 3 hours earlier. Coraline, we need to talk. Call me back. The second, from 2 hours ago. This is urgent. Please call. Then where are you? Call me now. Coraline, I'm not joking. Pick up your phone. And finally, sent just 10 minutes before I looked at my phone. If you don't call me back in the next hour, you'll regret it. I almost laughed out loud in the elevator. The woman who had told me I was nothing but a burden, who had destroyed my wedding dress with scissors and a smile, was now demanding my immediate attention. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. But I didn't call back, not that day, and not the next. I had learned something valuable during my 6 weeks of radio silence. Peace was addictive. Without Cathy's constant criticism, Lovely's passive-aggressive comments, or the general atmosphere of walking on eggshells that had defined life in that house, I had rediscovered what it felt like to breathe freely. Living with Genevieve had been a revelation. Her apartment was chaotic in the best way. Art supplies scattered across every surface, half-finished projects claiming corners and walls, music playing at all hours. It was the opposite of Cathy's sterile museum-like house, where everything had to be perfect, and nothing could be out of place. Here creativity was encouraged. Mess was acceptable, and I was welcome to take up space without apologizing for it. Julian had taken the postponement better than I'd expected. Take all the time you need, he'd said when I called him that first day from Genevieve's couch. We have the rest of our lives to be married. A few weeks or even a few months won't change anything between us. I hadn't told him the real reason for the delay yet. That conversation would come when I was ready, but his unconditional support had only reinforced that I was marrying the right person. Work had become my sanctuary. Highland Marketing was a mid-sized firm that specialized in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation, which meant I spent my days helping businesses and public figures navigate their worst moments and come out stronger on the other side. The skills I was learning there, how to control narratives, how to anticipate moves and counter moves, how to turn a crisis into an opportunity, were proving more valuable than I'd ever imagined. The messages from Cathy continued for 3 days. each one more frantic than the last, each one revealing a little more desperation. By the end of the week, she'd cycled through anger. Seal, Witsior Mekalupakandelis, she 5 set de Bentunis, Witsiv Mortis Percantunis, if you tumio and batch forden, to set de call and push. I need your help. It was the word help that finally got my attention. Cathy Thorne asking for help was like a shark, asking for swimming lessons, theoretically possible, but so contrary to the natural order that it demanded investigation. I was curious enough to finally listen to the voicemails she'd left. The first few were predictably entitled, demands that I call back immediately, threats about consequences if I didn't comply, the usual power plays I'd grown up with. But the later messages told a different story. Coraline, I know you're angry about the wedding situation, but this is bigger than that. There are some complications with Lovely's marriage to Cedric. Legal complications. I need someone who understands business and contracts, and you're the only person I know who works in that field. Legal complications. That was interesting. The Vance family is threatening to pull out of everything if we can't resolve some issues that have come up. Please just call me back. We can work through our personal problems later, but right now I need your professional expertise. Professional expertise. 6 weeks ago, I was just an orphan playing dress-up, who didn't deserve a real wedding. Now I was someone whose professional expertise was desperately needed. The final voicemail was the most revealing. Coraline, I'm going to be honest with you. The marriage contract with the Vances is more complicated than we initially understood. There are financial obligations that I didn't fully consider when we arranged the engagement. If Lovely doesn't marry Cedric, we could lose everything. The house, the business, everything. I know I haven't always been the stepmother you deserved, but please don't let our family problems affect Lovely's future. She's my daughter, and she needs this marriage to work. I sat in Genevieve's kitchen, staring at my phone, trying to process what I'd just heard. Financial obligations, marriage contract, arranged engagement. Suddenly Lovely's rushed wedding, and Cathy's desperate maneuvering made a lot more sense. Well? Genevieve asked, sliding a cup of coffee across the table to me. She'd been listening to my end of the conversation with the kind of fascination usually reserved for particularly dramatic reality television. It sounds like Cathy got herself into some kind of business arrangement with the Vance family that depends on Lovely marrying their son. And now something's gone wrong with the arrangement. That's what it sounds like. She mentioned legal complications and financial obligations. I took a sip of coffee, thinking, you know what this means, right? That karma is a beautiful thing. That Lovely's engagement was never about love. It was about money. Cathy arranged her daughter's marriage as part of some kind of business deal. Genevieve's expression grew serious. That's actually horrible, Cora. I mean, I know Lovely went along with destroying your wedding dress, but if her mother basically sold her to the Vance family, she's still an adult who made her own choices, I pointed out. But you're right, it does add another layer to this whole situation. So what are you going to do? Are you going to call her back? I looked at my phone again, scrolling through the increasingly desperate messages. 6 weeks ago, Cathy had stood in my bedroom with scissors in her hand, and told me I was nothing but a burden, that I didn't deserve the wedding I'd planned, that I was damaged goods, who should be grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance I received. Now she needed my help, my professional expertise, my business knowledge. Yeah, I said finally, I'm going to call her back, but not because I want to help her. Then why? I smiled, and it was the kind of smile that would have made my old self uncomfortable. Because I want to know exactly how desperate she really is. And because I want to understand what kind of leverage I might have. Leverage for what? For making sure that what she did to me never happens to anyone else again. I scrolled through the messages one more time, noting the progression from anger to panic. Cathy made a crucial mistake, General. She assumed that cutting me out of her life would eliminate me as a factor in her problems. But sometimes the person you throw away is exactly the person you need to save you. And sometimes, Genevieve added with a grin, that person has learned enough about crisis management to know that the best time to negotiate is when the other party is drowning. I picked up my phone and started dialing Cathy's number. After 6 weeks of silence, it was time to see what kind of conversation we could have when she needed something from me instead of the other way around. The phone rang twice before she answered. Coraline. Her voice was breathless, like she'd been waiting by the phone. Hello, Cathy. I got your messages. Thank God. Listen, I know we have some things to work through, but right now I know what you need, I interrupted calmly. The question is, what are you willing to do to get it? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What do you mean?
I mean that 6 weeks ago, you made it very clear that I wasn't family, that I didn't belong in your house, and that I didn't deserve the respect you'd show a stranger. Now you're calling me for help with your family's problems. I kept my voice perfectly level, professional. So I'm curious what's changed. Am I suddenly family again, or do you just need to use me for something? Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more careful. Coraline, I know I hurt you. I know I handled the wedding situation badly. You destroyed my wedding dress with scissors, Cathy. That's not handling something badly. That's deliberately inflicting cruelty. You're right. You're absolutely right. And I'm sorry. But right now, Lovely's entire future is at stake, and you're the only person who might be able to help us navigate this situation. Why me specifically? Because you work in crisis management. Because you understand contracts and legal issues. Because, she hesitated. Because you're smart, Coraline. Smarter than I gave you credit for. Too little, too late, I thought. But also exactly what I needed to hear. I'll consider helping you, I said finally. But if I do, it's going to be on my terms. Not yours. Not Lovely's. Mine. Of course. Whatever you need. Good. Then let's meet tomorrow evening to discuss the situation. Somewhere neutral. I thought for a moment. The library cafe on Elm Street. 7 o'clock. The library. Couldn't we just meet at the house? The library, Cathy. 7 o'clock. Come alone. Alone? But Lovely should probably be there since this affects her. Come alone. Or don't come at all. Those are your options. I could hear her struggling with the reality that she wasn't in control of this conversation, that she couldn't set the terms or make demands. After a long moment, she sighed. Okay. The library cafe. 7 o'clock. I'll be there. Good. And Cathy, bring everything. Every document. Every contract. Every piece of correspondence related to this arrangement with the Vance family. If you want my help, I need to understand exactly what kind of mess you've gotten yourself into. I will. And Coraline, thank you. I know I don't deserve.
I hung up before she could finish the sentence. 6 weeks ago she was right, she didn't deserve my help. But that was 6 weeks ago when I still thought of myself as someone who had something to lose. Now I understood the truth. I wasn't helping her because she deserved it. I was helping her because I deserved the opportunity to finally hold all the cards. The library cafe was perfect for what I had in mind. Public enough that Cathy wouldn't try anything dramatic, but quiet enough for us to have a real conversation about whatever mess she'd gotten herself into. I arrived 20 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner where I could see the entrance but still have privacy for what was likely to be a very revealing discussion. Cathy walked in at exactly 7 o'clock, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the 6 weeks since I'd seen her. Her usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and she was clutching a leather portfolio that looked heavy enough to contain exactly the kind of paperwork that could ruin someone's life. She spotted me immediately and made her way over, her heels clicking against the floor with less confidence than usual. When she reached the table, she hesitated for a moment, like she wasn't sure if she should sit down or wait for permission. Sit, I said simply, gesturing to the chair across from me. She sat down carefully, placing the portfolio on the table between us like it was a live explosive. Thank you for meeting with me. I know this situation is complicated. Before we start, I interrupted. I want to establish some ground rules. First, you're going to tell me the complete truth about what's happening. Not your version of the truth, not the story you've been telling yourself. The actual truth. Second, you're going to answer every question I ask, fully and honestly. Third, if I find out you've lied to me about anything, this conversation ends and you deal with your problems alone. She nodded quickly. Of course, whatever you need. Good, then let's start with the obvious question. What exactly is your arrangement with the Vance family? Cathy opened the portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Her hands were shaking slightly as she spread them across the table. It started about a year ago. The business, my interior design firm, was struggling. We'd lost several major clients, and I was having trouble securing new contracts. The overhead on the showroom, the staff salaries, the loans I'd taken out to expand, it was all becoming unsustainable. How unsustainable? I was 3 months behind on the commercial mortgage. 6 months behind on equipment loans. The bank was threatening foreclosure, and my creditors were starting to talk about collections. She looked down at the papers, her voice getting smaller. I was facing bankruptcy. This was not what I'd expected. Cathy had always projected an image of effortless wealth and success. The house in Willowbrook Heights, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, the elaborate social events, none of it had suggested financial desperation. So what changed? Cedric's father, Nelson Vance, approached me with a proposition. His family owns Vance Construction, and they were looking for an interior design firm to partner with on some major commercial projects. Hotels, office buildings, luxury developments. The kind of contracts that could save my business. And the catch was that Nelson wanted more than a business partnership. He wanted a family connection. His son Cedric was 26, unmarried, and showing no signs of settling down. Nelson was concerned about the family legacy, about having someone to eventually take over the business. I was starting to see where this was going. So he offered you the contracts in exchange for a marriage arrangement between Cedric and Lovely. Not exactly. Not at first. Cathy pulled out another set of documents. Initially, he just suggested that our families should get to know each other. Social events, dinner parties, opportunities for Cedric and Lovely to meet. I thought it was old-fashioned but harmless. When did it become not harmless? When the contracts started coming with very specific terms. She slid a document across the table to me. Look at Clause 12. I scanned the contract until I found the relevant section. What I read made my stomach turn. This says that all contracts between Thorne Design and Vance Construction are contingent on the successful marriage between Lovely Shaw and Cedric Vance, to be completed within 18 months of the signing of this agreement. Keep reading. I did. And if the marriage doesn't occur, Thorne Design agrees to pay liquidated damages in the amount of, Jesus Christ, Cathy, $250,000. Plus interest and legal fees, she said quietly. Plus the immediate termination of all current contracts, and the return of any advance payments already received. I set the document down and stared at her. You sold your daughter, I saved my business. She snapped, then immediately caught herself and lowered her voice. I mean, I thought I was providing security for both of us. For our whole family. Did Lovely know about the financial terms when she got engaged? Cathy's silence was answer enough. She doesn't know, does she? She thinks this is a normal engagement to a wealthy man who happened to fall in love with her. It started that way. Cedric did seem genuinely interested in her, and she was flattered by the attention. The engagement was her idea. But she doesn't know that if she backs out, you lose everything. She doesn't need to know. The wedding is planned for next month, and everything will work out fine. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the full scope of what Cathy had done. Okay, so you've arranged your daughter's marriage to save your business. What are the legal complications you mentioned in your voicemails? What's gone wrong? Cathy's face crumpled. Cedric found out about the contract terms. He didn't know either. His father had told him it was just a business partnership between our families, that any personal relationship that developed would be separate from the professional arrangements. How did he find out? He saw the contracts in his father's office. Last week, she pulled out another document. This one looked like a legal letter. This is from his attorney. He's threatening to break the engagement unless the marriage clauses are removed from all business contracts. I read the letter twice. It was professionally written, but the underlying message was clear. Cedric Vance felt deceived and manipulated, and he was not going to be forced into marriage for the sake of his father's business deals. What did Lovely say when you told her? I haven't told her. What do you mean you haven't told her? Her fiancé is threatening to call off the wedding and you haven't mentioned it to her. I was hoping I could resolve the situation without involving her. If I could just find a way to renegotiate the terms with Nelson, or maybe get a loan to pay off the liquidated damages clause. How were you planning to get a loan for $250,000 when you're already in debt up to your eyeballs? Cathy looked at me like the answer should be obvious. I was hoping you might know someone. Or have some ideas about how to restructure the deal. You work in crisis management, this is a crisis. I sat back and let the full picture settle in my mind. Cathy had gotten herself into an impossible situation by treating her daughter like a business asset. Now the deal was falling apart, she was facing financial ruin, and her solution was to ask the stepdaughter she'd humiliated and abandoned to somehow fix everything. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. I said slowly. You arranged Lovely's engagement as part of a business deal. You kept the financial terms secret from both Lovely and Cedric. Now Cedric wants out. You're facing massive financial penalties, and you want me to help you find a way to either force him back into the marriage or come up with $250,000 to buy your way out. That's a very harsh way to put it. But it's accurate. She nodded reluctantly. And 6 weeks ago, when you destroyed my wedding dress and told me I was nothing but a burden, was any of this going on? Yes, but so you knew your own daughter's engagement was basically a business transaction. You knew you were facing financial ruin if it fell through, and you still decided to sabotage my wedding so Lovely could have the better dress and venue. Cathy's face went pale. I thought if Lovely had the perfect wedding, it would help cement the relationship with Cedric. You thought that if she looked beautiful enough, he'd be too invested to back out when he eventually learned the truth. I was trying to protect her future. No, I said, my voice growing colder. You were trying to protect your business. And you were willing to destroy my happiness and manipulate your own daughter to do it. I stood up and started gathering the documents. I've heard enough. Wait. Cathy reached across the table, her eyes desperate. You said you'd consider helping. I've told you everything, just like you asked. I said I'd consider it. I didn't say I'd decided. I looked down at her, this woman who had controlled and diminished me for 8 years, now begging for my assistance. But I will give you one piece of free advice: tell Lovely the truth. All of it. She deserves to know what her engagement really is before she makes any decisions about her future. If I tell her, she might call off the wedding. Maybe she should. You don't understand, if this deal falls through, we lose everything. The house, the business, everything we've built. I picked up my purse and slung it over my shoulder. Cathy, you haven't built anything. You've mortgaged everything on the assumption that you could trade your daughter's autonomy for financial security. That's not building, that's gambling. Please, she said, and for the first time in all the years I'd known her, Cathy Thorne looked truly helpless. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you. But I'm begging you, help me find a way out of this. I looked down at her for a long moment. This woman who had spent so many years making me feel small and unwanted. She was still sitting at the table, surrounded by the evidence of her own poor choices, waiting for me to save her from the consequences of her actions. I'll be in touch, I said finally, and walked out of the cafe, without looking back. But as I drove home to Genevieve's apartment, my mind was already working through the possibilities. Not because I wanted to help Cathy, I didn't. But because I was starting to see an opportunity. A way to not only resolve her crisis, but to ensure that she never again had the power to manipulate or control anyone the way she'd controlled me. The pieces were all there, I just needed to figure out how to arrange them. I spent the entire weekend reviewing every document Cathy had given me, spreading them across Genevieve's dining room table like pieces of a particularly complex puzzle. The more I read, the more obvious it became that Cathy had gotten herself into this mess, through a combination of desperation, poor judgment, and the kind of entitled thinking that assumed other people existed to solve her problems. But I also saw something else: opportunity. By Monday morning, I had a plan. Not a plan to help Cathy, a plan to control her. There's a difference, and in crisis management, that difference is everything. I called her Tuesday afternoon. Coraline. She answered on the first ring, voice breathless with hope. Have you thought about what we discussed? I have. And I've come up with a solution. Thank God. What do you need me to do? First, I need you to call Nelson Vance and set up a meeting for Thursday afternoon. Tell him you have someone who might be able to resolve the situation with Cedric. Who? You, me. But don't mention my name, or my relationship to your family. Just say you've brought in a professional mediator, who specializes in contract disputes. Okay, I can do that. What else? Second, I need you to meet with me tomorrow evening to go over exactly what you're going to say, and what you're not going to say. Every word of this has to be carefully managed. Of course. Where do you want to meet? My office. Highland Marketing Solutions, downtown, 6 o'clock. Your office. But what if someone sees us together? Cathy, if you want my help, you follow my instructions. If you don't, you figure this out yourself. Those are your only 2 options. There was a pause. Okay, your office at 6. And Cathy, bring Lovely with you. Lovely. But I told you, she doesn't know about the contract terms. She's going to know by Thursday. This only works if everyone involved understands exactly what's happening and what's at stake. But if she finds out, she might make an informed decision about her own life. What a terrible thing that would be. I could hear Cathy struggling on the other end of the line. The idea of giving her daughter actual agency in this situation was clearly foreign to her. Fine, she said finally. I'll bring Lovely. Wednesday evening arrived, with the kind of early autumn chill that makes everything feel more serious, more consequential. I'd stayed late at the office to prepare, printing out copies of my own analysis of the Vance contracts, and organizing my thoughts into what would essentially be a presentation. By 6 o'clock, I was ready. Cathy and Lovely arrived together, and the contrast between them was striking. Cathy looked nervous, constantly checking her phone and adjusting her purse strap. Lovely looked confused, but curious, glancing around my office like she'd never seen me in a professional context before. Thank you for coming, I said, gesturing for them to sit in the chairs I'd arranged in front of my desk. Before we start, Lovely, do you know why your mother asked you to be here tonight? Lovely glanced at Cathy, who was suddenly very interested in her manicure. Not really. She said you might be able to help with some business problems related to my wedding. That's one way to put it. I pulled out copies of the contracts and placed them on the desk, where both women could see them. Lovely, what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear, but you need to understand the full situation before you make any decisions about your future. I walked them through everything. The financial terms of Cathy's arrangement with Nelson Vance. The marriage clauses that made Lovely's wedding a business transaction. Cedric's discovery of the truth, and his threats to break the engagement. The $250,000 penalty that would destroy Cathy's business if the wedding didn't happen. Lovely's face went through several stages during my explanation: confusion, disbelief, hurt, and finally a cold anger that reminded me uncomfortably of her mother. You sold me, she said quietly, staring at Cathy. You literally sold me to save your business. Lovely, that's exactly what you did. Lovely's voice was rising now. You arranged my engagement based on a business deal. You let me believe that Cedric loved me, that this was a real relationship, when the whole time it was just a transaction. Cedric does care about you. Does he? Or does he just care about not being forced into marriage by his father's business arrangements? Lovely turned to me. You said he wants out. Is that because of the contract terms, or because he doesn't actually want to marry me? I chose my words carefully. According to his attorney's letter, he objects to being manipulated into marriage through business pressure. That doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't have feelings for you, but it does mean he wants those feelings to be separate from financial obligations. Lovely sat back in her chair, looking like someone who'd just learned that her entire reality was built on lies. Which, I realized, was essentially what had happened. So what happens now? She asked. If I call off the wedding, Mom loses everything. If I go through with it, I'm marrying someone who might not want to be married to me. Actually, I said, there's a third option. Both women looked at me expectantly. I can fix this. All of it. But it's going to require both of you to accept some new realities about how this family works from now on. What do you mean? Cathy asked. I stood up and walked around to the front of my desk, positioning myself where I could look down at both of them. It was a power move I'd learned from watching my boss handle difficult clients, and it had the desired effect. Both women shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. I mean that the old family dynamic, where Cathy makes decisions that affect everyone else, without consulting anyone, is over. If I'm going to fix this mess, I become the decision maker for all family business matters going forward. That's ridiculous, Cathy said. You can't just I can, and I am. Because I'm the only person in this room who isn't emotionally compromised, financially desperate, or romantically involved with a Vance family member. I'm also the only person who understands contract law and crisis management. I pulled out a document I drafted that afternoon. This is a family partnership agreement. It gives me legal authority to negotiate on behalf of Thorne Design, and to make decisions related to any family business matters. If you want my help, you both sign it. Lovely looked confused. But why would you want to get involved in Mom's business? Because your mother's business problems don't end with this Vance situation. Even if we resolve the immediate crisis, she's still financially unstable, still making poor decisions, still treating family members like assets to be leveraged. I looked directly at Cathy. This agreement ensures that never happens again. And if we don't sign? Cathy asked. Then you figure out how to come up with $250,000 in the next 3 weeks, and I go back to planning my own life without worrying about your family's problems. The room was quiet for a long moment. I could see Cathy weighing her options, trying to find some way to maintain control, while still getting what she needed. But I'd structured this carefully. She didn't have any good alternatives. What exactly would you have authority over? She asked. All business contracts. All financial decisions that affect family members. All arrangements that involve trading personal relationships for business advantage. I looked at Lovely. No one in this family gets engaged, married or otherwise committed to someone else, as part of a business deal ever again. And in exchange, I resolve the Vance situation in a way that protects Lovely's autonomy, preserves what can be saved of your business, and ensures that you never have to face this kind of crisis again. Lovely spoke up. What about Cedric? What happens to him in all this? That depends on what he actually wants. If he wants to marry you for the right reasons, then we'll find a way to make that happen without the business complications. If he doesn't, then you'll know that before you waste any more time on a relationship that isn't real. I could see Lovely considering this, weighing the value of finally knowing the truth, against the risk of losing what she'd thought was her perfect future. If I sign this, Cathy said slowly, what guarantee do I have that you'll actually fix things? None, I said bluntly. But what guarantee do you have that you can fix things yourself? You've been trying to manage this crisis for weeks, and all you've accomplished is making it worse. She flinched, but didn't argue. Here's what I'll guarantee, I continued. If you sign this agreement, I will resolve the immediate crisis with the Vance family within 2 weeks. I will restructure your business obligations, so that you're never again in a position where you have to trade family members for financial security. And I will make sure that this kind of situation never happens to anyone in this family again. How? I smiled, and it was the same kind of smile I'd worn when I walked out of that house 6 weeks ago, with my overnight bag, and my dignity intact. Leave that to me. Lovely signed first, her signature quick and decisive. Cathy hesitated for a full minute, pen hovering over the paper like she was signing her own death warrant. But eventually she signed too. Good, I said, collecting the documents. I'll call Nelson Vance tomorrow to set up our meeting. In the meantime, neither of you speaks to anyone in the Vance family about any of this. All communication goes through me from now on. What should I tell Cedric if he calls? Lovely asked. Tell him the truth, that you've brought in a professional mediator to help resolve the situation, and that all negotiations are being handled by a third party now. As they prepared to leave, Cathy turned back to me. Coraline, I know I don't have any right to ask this, but why are you helping us? After everything that happened? I considered the question for a moment. The honest answer was that I wasn't helping them. I was helping myself. Taking control of their crisis gave me the power to ensure they could never hurt me again. But there was another truth underneath that one. Because someone in this family should make decisions based on what's right instead of what's convenient, I said. And because Lovely deserves better than being traded like a business asset. After they left, I sat alone in my office, looking out at the city lights, and thinking about how much had changed in just 7 weeks. 7 weeks ago, I was the family burden, the orphan who should be grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance I received. Now I was the person they needed to save them. Tomorrow, I would start phase 2 of my plan. Not revenge, exactly, but something more lasting. The complete restructuring of family power dynamics to ensure that the people who had once controlled me would never again have that opportunity. It was, I realized, much more satisfying than simple revenge would have been. Thursday afternoon arrived with unseasonably warm weather, the kind that makes everything feel possible and dangerous at the same time. I'd spent the morning preparing for what would either be the most important negotiation of my career, or a spectacular failure that would leave Cathy's family in ruins. Either outcome was acceptable to me, which gave me exactly the kind of negotiating power that most people never get to experience. The Vance Construction headquarters was located in a gleaming downtown tower that screamed money and influence.
Everything from the marble lobby to the private elevator that whisked me to the 32nd floor was designed to intimidate visitors and remind them exactly who held the power in any given situation. Under normal circumstances, it might have worked. But these weren't normal circumstances, and I wasn't a normal visitor. Nelson Vance's office was exactly what I'd expected: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, and enough awards and photos with politicians to establish that this was a man who was used to getting his way. He was younger than I'd anticipated, maybe early 50s, with the kind of aggressive energy that suggested he'd built his empire through sheer force of will, rather than inherited privilege. "Miss Hayes," he said, rising from behind his desk to shake my hand. His grip was firm, but not crushing, professional but not warm. "Cathy tells me you might be able to help resolve our current complications." "That depends on what kind of resolution you're looking for," I replied, taking the seat he offered across from his desk. "And how honest you're willing to be about what those complications really are." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure I follow." I pulled out my tablet and opened the notes I'd prepared. "Vance, I've reviewed all the contracts between your company and Thorne Design, including the marriage clauses that your son recently discovered. I've also read his attorney's letter, threatening to break the engagement unless those clauses are removed. And I'm curious about something. When you structured these contracts, did you actually believe that forcing two young people into marriage through business pressure was a sustainable long-term strategy?" Nelson's expression hardened. "I don't appreciate your tone, Miss Hayes. My business arrangements are based on proven models of family alliance that have worked for generations." "Proven models," I repeated. "You mean arranged marriages?" "Which worked fine when women had no legal rights and divorce was impossible. But we're not living in that world anymore, are we?" "What's your point?" "My point is that your current approach has created a crisis that threatens both businesses and both families. Your son feels manipulated and betrayed. Lovely Shaw doesn't even know the full terms of her own engagement. Cathy Thorne is facing financial ruin. And you're stuck with contracts that your own son's attorney is calling unconscionable." I leaned forward slightly. "So here's my question. Are you trying to save face, or are you trying to save your business relationships?" Nelson was quiet for a moment, studying me like he was trying to figure out what game I was playing. "What do you have in mind?" "A complete restructuring of your arrangement with Thorne Design. One that removes the marriage components entirely, while preserving the business benefits for both companies." "Impossible. The marriage alliance was the entire point of the partnership." "No," I said calmly. "The marriage alliance was your insurance policy against Cathy defaulting on her obligations. But there are better ways to structure insurance policies, Mr. Vance. Ways that don't involve treating human beings like collateral." I pulled up a document on my tablet and turned it so he could see the screen. "I've drafted a revised partnership agreement that gives you everything you actually need, while eliminating the personal complications that are threatening to destroy the relationship." Nelson leaned forward to read the proposal. I watched his expression change as he worked through the terms, seeing the advantages I'd built into the structure. "This gives Vance Construction partial ownership of Thorne Design," he said slowly. 40% ownership, to be specific. "Which provides you with direct control over the design decisions and project timelines that affect your construction schedules. It also gives you audit rights over Thorne's financial management, so you can ensure they're not making the same mistakes that got them into this crisis. And in exchange you remove all marriage clauses from existing contracts. You provide Thorne Design with a capital infusion sufficient to resolve their current debt crisis, and you guarantee 3 years of steady project work." "What about the liquidated damages clause?" "Eliminated entirely. Replaced with performance benchmarks that are actually related to business outcomes, rather than personal relationships." Nelson continued reading, and I could see him working through the implications. What I'd proposed was actually more favorable to Vance Construction than the original arrangement. It gave him direct business control, without the messy complications of forced marriage. It also eliminated the legal vulnerabilities that came with conditioning business contracts on personal relationships. "This is surprisingly sophisticated," he admitted. But I'm still not clear on how this resolves the situation with my son and lovely Shah. It doesn't, I said bluntly. That situation will resolve itself once the business pressure is removed. If Cedric wants to marry Lovely for personal reasons, he's free to do so. If he doesn't, she's free to find someone who actually wants to be with her. And if they don't marry, then they don't marry. Your business relationship with Thorne Design continues regardless, and nobody gets penalized for making personal choices based on their own feelings, rather than their parents' business arrangements. Nelson sat back in his chair, considering the proposal. What's in this for you, Miss Hayes? Cathy mentioned you work in crisis management, but this level of restructuring goes well beyond normal consulting fees. This was the moment I'd been preparing for all week. The moment when I had to decide whether to be completely honest about my motivations, or to maintain the professional facade I'd been presenting. I chose honesty. Mr. Vance, 6 weeks ago, Cathy Thorne destroyed my wedding dress with scissors because she decided her daughter deserved my wedding more than I did. She told me I was nothing but a burden, that I didn't deserve to marry into a good family, and that I should be grateful for whatever scraps of acceptance I received. Nelson's expression shifted to something that might have been surprise, or possibly respect.
She did this, I continued, while knowing that her own daughter's engagement was a business transaction, and while facing the financial crisis that we're discussing today. She chose to destroy my happiness to protect her own interests, without considering that I might someday be the person she'd need to save her. And now you are, now I am, but I'm not saving her, Mr. Vance. I'm restructuring the situation so that she can never again trade family members for business advantages. I pulled out another document. This partnership agreement doesn't just resolve the current crisis. It ensures that any future business decisions affecting family members have to be approved by the new partnership structure, which means Cathy will never again be in a position to arrange someone's marriage for financial gain. Who controls the partnership? Highland Marketing Solutions will serve as the managing partner for all family business decisions, which means I do. Nelson was quiet for a long moment, studying both documents. You're not just fixing her crisis, he said finally. You're taking over her business. I'm preventing future crises by ensuring that someone with actual business sense is making the decisions. Cathy has proven that she can't be trusted with other people's lives. And what about Highland Marketing? What do they get out of this arrangement? I smiled. Highland Marketing gets a 40% share of a restructured design firm with guaranteed contracts from Vance Construction. Not a bad expansion opportunity for a crisis management company. You've thought this through very carefully. I've had 6 weeks to think about it, and I've learned that the best revenge isn't destroying someone who hurt you, it's making sure they can never hurt anyone else. Nelson stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the city while he considered my proposal. After several minutes, he turned back to me. I have one concern about this arrangement, which is, my son. Cedric genuinely believed he was falling in love with lovely Shaw. If we eliminate the business pressure and she chooses not to marry him, he's going to be heartbroken. Mr. Vance, with respect, your son is 26 years old. He'll survive a broken heart. What he might not survive is a marriage based on deception and manipulation. You're not protecting him by forcing him into a relationship that was structured as a business transaction. And if he never forgives me for arranging the whole thing in the first place, then you'll have learned the same lesson Cathy is learning, that treating family members like business assets has consequences. He was quiet again, thinking. Finally he returned to his desk and picked up both documents. I'll need to have my attorney review these terms. Of course, but Mr. Vance, I need an answer by Monday. Lovely Shaw deserves to know the truth about her engagement before she starts planning a life with someone who might not want to be there. And if I say no, then Cathy defaults on her contracts, you lose $250,000 in liquidated damages, and your son spends the rest of his life wondering whether his marriage was real or just another one of your business deals. I stood up and shook his hand. But I don't think you'll say no, because you're smarter than that, and because you can see that this arrangement gives you everything you actually wanted without the complications that are threatening to destroy it. As I rode the elevator down from the 32nd floor, I felt the same strange calm I'd experienced the morning I walked out of Cathy's house with my overnight bag. Not the satisfaction of revenge, exactly, but something deeper, the satisfaction of control. In 3 days, I would know whether Nelson Vance was smart enough to accept a deal that saved everyone involved. But either way, I'd already won the only victory that mattered. Cathy Thorne would never again have the power to destroy someone else's happiness for her own benefit. And I would never again be in a position where someone else controlled my future. The The pieces were all in place, now I just had to wait for everyone else to realize that the game had changed, and that I was the one who'd changed it. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that makes everything feel sharper, more defined. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my office when my assistant buzzed to tell me that Nelson Vance was on line 1. Miss Hayes, his voice was brisk but respectful. I've had my attorney review your proposal. We're prepared to move forward with the restructuring as outlined. Excellent, I'll have the final documents prepared by Wednesday. We can sign everything on Thursday. There is one condition, he said. I want to be present when you explain the new arrangement to the Thorne family. I think it's important that they understand this comes from both of us. I smiled. Nelson Vance was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He understood that what we'd negotiated was essentially a controlled demolition of Cathy's power, and he wanted to make sure she knew he was an active participant rather than a victim of my maneuvering. Of course, I was planning to meet with them Wednesday evening anyway. Your office or mine? Yours, I think. Neutral territory. Wednesday evening, I arranged my office like a boardroom, conference table in the center, chairs positioned to create clear sightlines, documents organized in neat stacks. When you're about to deliver life-changing news, presentation matters. Cathy and Lovely arrived first, both looking nervous but hopeful. Cathy had dressed like she was going to a job interview, which in a way she was. Lovely wore the kind of outfit that suggested she still believed this meeting would result in her wedding being saved. Nelson arrived 5 minutes later, and I could see both women's expressions shift when they realized this wasn't going to be the simple consultation they'd expected. Before we begin, I said, gesturing for everyone to take their seats, I want to make sure everyone understands what we've accomplished. Mr. Vance and I have successfully restructured your business relationship in a way that eliminates the marriage requirements while preserving the financial benefits for both companies. Cathy's face lit up with relief. So Lovely doesn't have to marry Cedric if she doesn't want to. And we don't lose the contracts. That's correct. The marriage clauses have been completely eliminated. And the liquidated damages, eliminated as well. Lovely leaned forward. What about Cedric? Is he okay with this arrangement? Nelson spoke for the first time. My son is relieved that the business pressure has been removed. Whether he chooses to continue your relationship will be entirely up to both of you, based on your personal feelings rather than family obligations. I could see both women processing this information, trying to understand what seemed too good to be true. Which of course, it was. However, I continued, the restructuring did require some significant changes to the ownership structure of Thorne Design. Cathy's smile faltered. What kind of changes? I slid copies of the new partnership agreement across the table. Vance Construction now owns 40% of your company. Highland Marketing Solutions owns another 30%. You retain 30% ownership and will continue as the creative director. But all major business decisions will now be made by the partnership board. The silence in the room was deafening. I watched Cathy's face go through several stages of emotion as she read through the document, confusion, disbelief, and finally a dawning understanding of what had just happened. You took my company, she said quietly. I saved your company, I corrected. And I ensured that you'll never again be in a position to trade family members for business advantages. You can't do this. This is theft. I'll call my lawyer. Your lawyer can't help you, Cathy. You signed the family partnership agreement last week, giving me authority to negotiate on behalf of Thorne Design. Everything in this restructuring is completely legal. Lovely was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. I don't understand. Coraline, you said you were going to help us. I did help you. You're no longer being forced into a marriage based on your mother's business debts. You're free to make your own choices about your relationship with Cedric. But you stole Mom's business. I prevented your mother from ever again using family members as collateral for her poor business decisions. I looked directly at Cathy. Tell me, what was your plan if Lovely had gotten pregnant and then Cedric wanted to leave her? Would you have used the baby as leverage to keep the marriage intact? Cathy's face went white. That's not, I would never. Wouldn't you? 6 weeks ago you destroyed my wedding dress because you decided Lovely's happiness was more important than mine. You kept the financial terms of her engagement secret because you decided her ignorance was more convenient than her consent. You were perfectly willing to let her marry someone who didn't know he was being manipulated into the relationship. I stood up, looking down at both of them. You've spent so many years treating people like assets to be managed that you forgot they were people with their own rights and desires. This restructuring ensures that never happens again. Nelson cleared his throat. For what it's worth, Miss Thorne, this arrangement is actually more financially stable for your company than what you had before. You'll have steady income, professional management, and protection from the kind of crisis that nearly destroyed you. But I won't be in control, Cathy said, her voice barely above a whisper. No, I agreed. You won't be in control, because you've proven that you can't be trusted with control over other people's lives. Cathy looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her finally understanding the full scope of what had happened. This was never about helping us, was it? This was about revenge. This was about justice, I replied calmly. And about making sure that the woman who told me I was nothing but a burden never again has the power to determine anyone else's worth. The meeting ended with Cathy and Lovely leaving in stunned silence, clutching copies of documents that had just fundamentally altered their lives. Nelson shook my hand before departing, a gesture that felt like acknowledgement between equals. As I sat alone in my office afterward, I thought about the scene 6 weeks ago when I'd found my wedding dress in pieces on my bedroom floor. Cathy had stood there with scissors in her hand, so confident in her power, so certain that I would accept whatever she decided to do to me. Now she knew better, and she would spend the rest of her business career remembering exactly what happened when she underestimated an orphan playing dress-up. 3 months later, I stood in the bridal suite at Rosewood Manor, the same venue Cathy had stolen from me and given to Lovely, adjusting the pearl buttons on my new wedding dress. This one was even more beautiful than the original hand-sewn silk with delicate beadwork that caught the light like stars. Genevieve had insisted we use the same designer, but with a completely different vision. Something that's entirely yours, she'd said. Something no one else could ever claim. Through the window, I could see guests arriving for what the society pages were calling the wedding of the season. Julian's family, my new colleagues from Highland Marketing, clients who'd become friends, and even a few people from my old life who'd proven themselves worthy of inclusion in my new one. Notably absent were Cathy and Lovely. The restructuring had proceeded exactly as planned. Vance Construction had provided the capital infusion that saved Thorne Design from bankruptcy, Highland Marketing had assumed operational control, and Cathy had been relegated to the role of creative consultant, well paid but powerless. The arrangement was working beautifully for everyone except the person who'd created the crisis in the first place. Lovely had called off her engagement to Cedric 2 weeks after our final meeting. I can't marry someone when I don't know if his feelings are real, she'd told me during one of our awkward coffee conversations. Cedric, for his part, had seemed more relieved than heartbroken. It turned out that discovering your engagement was a business transaction had a way of clarifying your actual feelings. 5 minutes, Genevieve announced, bustling into the bridal suite with the kind of organized energy that had made her invaluable throughout the wedding planning process. You ready for this? More than ready, I said, meaning it completely. Any regrets about the guest list? I considered the question honestly. Part of me had wondered whether I should invite Cathy and Lovely as some kind of gesture of reconciliation or forgiveness. But forgiveness, I'd learned, didn't require me to give people continued access to my happiness. None, I said finally. Today is about celebrating the life I've built, not managing the feelings of people who tried to tear it down. Good answer. Genevieve handed me my bouquet, white roses and eucalyptus, simple and elegant. Julian's waiting for you, and he looks like he might cry the moment he sees you, so be prepared for that. As we made our way to the ceremony space, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 6 months ago, I'd been someone who defined herself by her willingness to accommodate others, to make herself smaller so that other people could be more comfortable. I'd measured my worth by how little trouble I caused, and how grateful I appeared for whatever consideration I received. The woman walking down this aisle was someone entirely different, someone who understood that kindness without boundaries was just another form of self-destruction, someone who had learned the difference between being nice and being respected. The ceremony itself was perfect, intimate, meaningful, and completely focused on the life Julian and I were choosing to build together. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt the final piece of my old life click into place with my new one. I was no longer Coraline Hayes, the orphan who'd been grateful for whatever family would take her in. I was Coraline Finch, a woman who'd built her own family through choice rather than obligation. At the reception, I found myself standing on the terrace, overlooking the gardens, taking a moment to appreciate how different this celebration felt from the wedding that had been planned for this venue months earlier. That wedding would have been a performance designed to satisfy other people's expectations. This one was a genuine reflection of who Julian and I actually were. Penny, for your thoughts. Julian appeared beside me, loosening his tie with the kind of relaxed happiness that made my heart skip. Just thinking about how much has changed. Any of it feels surreal, All of it, I admitted. 6 months ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to me was having my wedding dress destroyed. Now I realize it was the best thing that could have happened. How so? I thought about how to explain it, because it forced me to stop trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. It taught me the difference between family and people who just happen to share your living space. Julian was quiet for a moment. I know you haven't told me all the details about what happened with your step-family. Are you planning to? Someday, I said, when the story feels completely finished. Is it not finished now? I considered the question. Cathy was still working for the company that I now partially owned, still living in the house that would never again be used as collateral for her business schemes, still learning to navigate a world where she couldn't trade other people's happiness for her own benefit. Lovely was figuring out how to build a life based on her own choices rather than her mother's arrangements. Both of them were dealing with the consequences of decisions that had seemed so simple when they'd made them. I think it's finished enough, I said finally. The important part is over. Which part was that? The part where I learned that I don't owe anyone my silence about how they've treated me, and I don't owe anyone continued access to my life just because we share history. As we rejoined our guests, I thought about the lesson that had taken me the longest to learn, that some people would only respect you after you'd proven you didn't need their approval. Cathy had spent years treating me like a burden because she'd believed I had nowhere else to go, nothing else to fall back on, no power to change my circumstances. She'd been wrong about all of it. The evening continued with dancing, laughter, and the kind of celebration that happens when people gather to honor something real rather than something performed. Near midnight, as Julian and I prepared to leave for our honeymoon, Genevieve pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. "Not for how this all turned out, but for who you became in the process." Who did I become? Someone who understands that the best revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's building a life so good that their opinion of it becomes irrelevant. As Julian and I drove away from Rosewood Manor, I thought about the woman who'd stood in that same venue months earlier, begging me not to let family problems affect Lovely's future. Cathy had been right about one thing: family problems were affecting her daughter's future, just not in the way she'd expected. The difference was that now, Lovely was free to create her own future based on her own choices, and I was free to build mine without worrying about whether it met with the approval of people who'd never valued me when I was trying to earn their love. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the consequences of their own actions, and sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the freedom to stop trying to be worthy of people who were never worthy of you. This story, I realized, was never really about revenge. It was about refusing to be small. It was about understanding that your value doesn't decrease based on someone else's inability to see it. And it was about learning that sometimes the people who break you also break you free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.